Good morning, everybody. We have a nice little intimate group here. If we were a couple of people fewer, I would invite you to the bar. I think it's still too early for that. But I'm from Chicago. We start drinking early. The session this morning is called Transportation in a Friction-Free World. I'll spend the next 20 or so minutes just kind of walking you through my perspective, our company's perspective on how rapidly things are evolving. I'd like to leave a couple of minutes, hopefully, for some questions. I always find it's a good place to start is for people to know who's standing up in front of you. So my name is Jonas Stern. I'm a serial entrepreneur. That's my family. So my wife's also an entrepreneur. So if you ever get to Montreal and you have a hankering for the best donuts you've ever tasted in your life, my wife owns the best donut shop in Montreal. It's called Donuts. It's on DeCarry Boulevard, and she's an awesome entrepreneur. She gave me 5 wonderful children. So if you can imagine what it's like growing up in a family with 2 entrepreneurs, it's even crazier than growing up in a family with a single entrepreneur. I spent the lion's share of the early part of my career building businesses for other people. First Avon, then I ran the direct-to-consumer business for Saks Fifth Avenue when it was still Saks before it was a division of HBC. I launched Fido in Canada, so I was the founding chief marketing officer, so all that Fido dog nonsense was me. And then as an entrepreneur, I founded a company called Beyond the Rack, which was an e-commerce company here in Canada. Over the course of about 7 years, we grew it from a standing start to about $150 million in net revenue. Over the course of the 8 years, we did about $1 billion in an e-commerce marketplace. About 3.5 years ago, I got a call from somebody that said, you should meet this guy, Ashish Dalal, in Chicago. He's running a parking app that's venture funded. And I said, parking, Chicago, venture, not interested. I was on my way to San Francisco and decided to pop in and see him anyhow, because I'll take any chance I can to meet smart entrepreneurs. And in a very platonic way, I fell in love with him and with his ideas about how mobility was going to change. We didn't spend any time talking about parking. He had a company that was called ParkWiz, which is arguably the worst name for a parking company. Always made me think of that scene in Seinfeld where George is looking for a place to pee. He also owns a brand called Best Parking. We completed a fairly massive pivot over the last 2 years and founded a company called Arrive, of which these two are part of it. And I'll explain to you at least our vision for why we did our pivot and how more directly that impacts the payments world. So enough about me and enough about Arrive. Let's talk a little bit about the economy. There's a general movement where consumers are looking for convenience. They're looking for friction-free user experiences. It's permeating all sectors or all verticals of the economy. Coffee, I know many people, myself included, that will cross the street to go to a Starbucks, not because their coffee's so good, but just because they have the app. In the US, you can get your booze delivered. I don't know what it's like in Ontario, but in Montreal, you can get your pot delivered. Amazon they just announced that they're building a 2 million square foot airport in Kentucky because they want to get packages to you even faster, like it wasn't fast enough. So it's about overnight delivery. And I don't think I need to tell you about Uber and all of the other peer-to-peer parts of the economy. But it's changing very rapidly, all sectors. Entire industries have either become irrelevant or converted to digital. Insurance now, at least 60% of insurance is sold online. Travel is almost 70%. By extension, we're in the auto industry, and I'll explain that a little bit, but the auto industry, close to 80% of shopping for automobiles is done online before the transaction is finished at a dealer. And if it wasn't illegal to buy a car directly, which it is in most states in the United States, most of that would be done direct as well. Tesla's really blazing the path there. And restaurants are changing dramatically to the point where the next use for most of this downtown urban real estate isn't for restaurants where you can walk in and pick stuff up. It's for dark kitchens where they're going to be delivering directly to you. So real estate is changing, the restaurant business is changing. It's all on demand all the time. And we've already seen a massive transformation in transportation. I think the first place we saw it was in tolling. EasyPass in the United States operates in 17 states. They've got 35 million transponders on vehicles, and they manage about $9 billion in tolls last year alone. On the fuel side, here in Canada, I think we have the SO Pass, that's the little transponder that I use. But in the US, ExxonMobil's got 20 million of those transponders. Gas Buddy, which is a partner of ours, 5 million people use it every week to find cheap gas and now pay for gas in the United States. P97, which is a company that's making friction-free fueling available to consumers, is working with large companies. So transportation is moving very rapidly towards friction-free. Our view, and certainly the view that we've taken as a company and as an industry, is that parking is the next frontier. If you want to talk about an industry that has been locked in kind of like its prehistoric remains, parking is perfect. I think you need an actuarial degree to figure out what you're going to pay for parking in a place like Toronto or downtown New York City. You've got this weird table with strange little charts, and the whole structure is very strange and very weird. And I don't know if you've gone to an event in and around, say, Scotiabank here in Toronto, but there's always some guy who's kind of running a business on top of a business so that you get the best spot. So it's a very strange and difficult for consumers to navigate, but it's a huge industry. Globally, it's $100 billion in parking, and it's growing. In North America, the way it breaks down is the lion's share of it is private parking garages, either large buildings or event or airport. Actually, a very small percentage of it happens on street, and that the percentage that's happening on street with things like Green Pier here in Toronto is becoming smaller and smaller because municipalities don't want you clogging up streets with cars. I think they want you on scooters and bikes now, and they want to charge for, as they say, curb use. So it's pushing more and more delivery vehicles, private cars, fleets into private garages. And no matter what you believe about the future of autonomous or connected vehicles, I don't think anybody's vision of an autonomous vehicle is once it finishes dropping you off at work at 8 o'clock in the morning, that there's some robotic arm that pulls a $20 bill out of the glove compartment and pulls a ticket. These vehicles, whether they're fleets or privately owned or they're car share or individually shared, they need to know where they're going, and they need to be able to find, book, and pay for parking. The interesting thing is today, we're just at the starting point of this transformation. Less than 2% of parking in North America is done digitally, but that transformation really is underway. If we look back to how parking was, and realistically how parking still is, these are pictures that I took over the last 9 months, so this is real. I mean, my favorite one is the one on the bottom with the dynamic pricing algorithm. Those signs. That's basically event parking outside of AT&T Park in San Francisco. So depending on what his load is and how busy he is and whether it's raining or whether the team's winning or losing, he pulls out a $15 or $25 or $30 sign. Not exactly Amazon-esque in terms of pricing algorithms. We referred to this whole thing as two-putt parking. The two-putt parking analogy is actually a reflection of my really crappy golf game. I play golf so badly, And I'm such an embarrassment to people that I play golf with that once a fellow golfer, I think we were in some Vegas tournament, so I actually had to try to perform. And I was just embarrassing myself and my team. He said, look, forget about the fairway, but when we get up onto the green, okay, I don't want you thinking that you're putting for a little hole that's like 19 feet away that's this big. Imagine the hole is like 6 feet big, and putt for that circumference, you're probably going to hit a pretty easy shot, and then you'll have an easy 2-putt. And that actually, it works pretty good. I mean, for me, it's really 3-putt. But if you think about the way we park our cars, especially in cities where we don't know where we're going. So if you were to go to San Francisco today and land at SFO, and you were going to need to park somewhere near the Embarcadero or south of Market, how are you going to know where you're going to park? So basically what you do is you turn on Waze, because we're all brilliant, or you Google Maps or Apple Maps, and you'll put in your destination, and it's going to guide you to the building where you're going. But it's not the Wild West, and you just hook up your horse to a thing in front of the building. So you need to put your car somewhere. So typically what we do is we 2-putt. We aim to the building, and then about 2 or 3 blocks before we start circling and looking. If we have time, we might do 1 or 2 circles around the block. If we don't, we'll just pull into the building and pay some crazy usurious fee. And the same thing is true for hotels and so on. You're time constrained, and ultimately we end up making a decision that has something to do with proximity, time, and economy. And that's our algorithm that we're solving for parking. You got to figure in today's day and age there's a better solution. And this guy, Ashish Dalal, about 9 years ago, was living in Boston. And every time the Red Sox played, he lived near Fenway, he couldn't find a parking spot. So he said, I'm going to solve this. I'm going to figure this thing out. And it took him 10 years, literally going block by block, to aggregate and rationalize a completely irrational industry. It's irrational for 2 basic principles. One, ownership and control of the assets, of the inventory, is completely fragmented. You have about 50,000 parking garages, private parking garages in the United States. You have almost 4,000 different owners. If you took the top 5 operators, you only get about 15% of the inventory. They run about 40 different kinds of technology systems. Some of them dating back, you see them, some of them dating back to 1975. So there's no set ownership, there's no set technology standards, and many of these guys are running them as cash businesses. So there's no incentive for them to be part of some integrated marketplace. So how do you change all of that, and how do you provide a better user experience? Well, much of that heavy lifting has been done over the last 10 years. Today, even in a place like Toronto, we launched Toronto last October with the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Raptors, and we're just launching with the Blue Jays, and we launched with Pearson Airport. You can go into our app or any one of our partner apps, put in an address, and up will pop a little map, and it'll show you all the parking spots that are available. You can pay $5, $10, $20, depending on your intersection of economy and efficiency. It's all mobile payment. There's no pulling tickets. Your spot is reserved when you show up. You have transparency of rates, so operator 1, 2, and 3, they're all in there with their rates, so they're vying and negotiating for your business. You can pre-buy and reserve, or you can just drive up if the lot provides that. You can do it through voice, and I'll show you some examples of that. It's all touchless, and then on the back end, it's all integrated into expense management systems like Concur or Expensify. So the heavy lifting of being able to provision a much better user experience, if you will, the Starbucks coffee of parking is there, and it works today in 230 cities. And our technology is in the hands of about 40 million consumers in North America. As we think towards the future, and that's not 10 years from now, it's like next quarter, this stuff gets bundled with charging. So most of the fleets are going EV. When you park your vehicle, you're going to want to get a full charge. The same way anytime you sit down and you can charge your phone, you're going to want to do the same thing with your vehicle. You're going to want to move away from fixed pricing to dynamic pricing. which allows landowners to do yield management and not solve for how many cars can I put in my facility, but how can I get the greatest yield? So maybe it's less cars, but at a higher rate. Fleets need urban places where they can put their cars. We have to get ready for micromobility. So, you know, the reality with the emergence of all the scooters and the dockless bikes is cities are not allowing them to clog up sidewalks. They need to go somewhere. And the most likely place that they're going to go is private parking garages, either open surface lots or inside of buildings. And also parking lots are starting to evolve. They're becoming service centers. You can get your Whole Foods delivered to the trunk of your car. You can get an oil change. You can get a charge. So there's a whole bunch of services that are now starting to become part of the parking experience, integrated. As we look at all of these other industries, there are really 5 key pillars that drive mass adoption of digitization of an industry. The first is connected supply. The second is a marketplace of prices. The third is friction-free payments. The fourth is customer satisfaction, so it's not good enough to offer a service. People have to come back and use it on a loyal basis. And finally, you have to drive demand. So you can sign up as much inventory into it, but you really have to be able to drive a considerable amount of demand. The connected supply is there today. Our network alone has close to 27,000 lots, which is about 60% of the available inventory. Last year we booked about 7 million parking transactions in about 230 cities, and we're delighted to say we're now in Canada. We'll be launching Montreal in a couple of months. You need a marketplace of prices, which has to be transparent for consumers. I want to book next to Rogers Place for 3 hours. You know, what are the options for me? If I use a valet or across the street, or if I'm willing to walk in the path for 3 blocks and park in another building. So you have to be able to do that. One of the critical components is the user experience needs to be friction-free. Nobody's going to submit themselves willingly to a conversion funnel at 60 kilometers an hour. So the 2 things that have to be present at the beginning of a user session in order for mobility to really work, mobility services really to work, is we need to have a UID and we need to have a payment mechanism that's default into this user experience. So whether that is Apple Wallet, whether that's MasterCard, whether that's Visa, or whether that's some third party like Amazon. It needs to be there first because the drop-off is too great if we ask somebody to either register or enter a payment mechanism at the tail end. Customer satisfaction has to be there. One of the things that we do, we have 170 full-time customer service reps that are answering phone calls in the middle of the night. Because the thing that we realized over the last 10 years is that we're provisioning a service that's actually really yucky and breaks a lot, and it breaks always at the worst times, and it's very, very inconvenient. So it's not enough to provision a service and provide access. We actually have to wrap it in a service layer, which we do. And that's why we get high results, not because things don't go wrong, not because you show up and the lot is closed, or the guy took off and you can't find your keys. We need to be able to solve those, in 30 seconds at 2 o'clock in the morning when you want to go home, or at the end of the baseball game. And then the final element is demand. About 3 years ago, we were a consumer app that had about 3 million consumers, and we were basically co-signing most of the capital that we had raised to Google and Facebook to acquire customers into a franchise that we called Parkways. And we recognized that that was not economically viable for us. And so we decided to open up our marketplace and our technology and basically give it away. And we had a thesis about a bunch of industries where parking as a transactional service made a lot of sense. And so we approached all the leaders in those various industries. The first one was in ticketing. And you could see all the guys that we signed up. So we're the exclusive with Ticketmaster. This year alone, we'll book over $100 million of parking for Ticketmaster. So if you're going to a Ticketmaster event in any one of their major cities, You're either going to I was going to say baseball, but baseball does their own thing through MLB and tickets.com. But if you're going to a hockey game or a basketball game, you're going to see the Harlem Globetrotters or Taylor Swift, and you're buying tickets, there's an inline user experience that says, you bought your tickets, do you want to book your parking? And then we come back to the consumer repeatedly through their life cycle, 52 days before the event when they bought the tickets. In the resale market, when they're reselling it, maybe you sell a parking pass with it, or the person who's buying it wants to buy a parking pass. The event reminder email that goes out 24 hours in advance. 2 weeks ago, for the Pink concert in Detroit, we run all the parking in Detroit at Little Caesars. We sent out a co-branded email with Waze. So we have a get to your seat faster functionality with Waze that tells you not how to get to the stadium and do two-putt parking better, but how to get to your parking spot and your seat quicker, and where you should plan your parking, because if you're coming from the north end of the city, it may be better to park here. For example, we launched with Pearson Airport and up an option where if you're going to a game or an event in town, so you're going to see a concert, and you live north or west of the city, you can park at Pearson through our app or through our system, and then take the up train, and all of that is a single user experience. So we're doing now park and ride from the airport because that's more convenient for some people than fighting the traffic in and out of the city before and after a game. Here's some examples of how this actually works on a white label basis. So we power it for 9 of the top 10 OEMs, the automakers. This is an example inside the Ford Pass, where you can find, book, and pay for parking. This is an example with Gas Buddy, which is the largest seller of gas digitally in the United States. Now you can not only find cheap gas, you can find cheap parking inside the same app and environment. And actually, when you book parking through their app, you get cash back that you can save on parking. This actually has a higher loyalty rate than our own native app. It's been so successful for us. Here's an example of the Ticketmaster event. A lot of people laugh about this because this is at Madison Square Garden for the Rangers. So you look for your tickets, you choose your seats, you're about to check out, and then you have the opportunity to book parking. Madison Square Garden's a 21-seat arena that's lit 320 days a year with everything from cultural events to basketball and hockey, and they have 0 parking. Just like here, Scotiabank's got 50 spaces. So really what they're doing is they're the vendor of record. Ticketmaster in Madison Square Garden or the Rangers are the vendor of record for parking, but they're selling you parking in a Tishman Speyer building, or in a RioCan building, or in a Cadillac Fairview building. So they are the vendor of record for this ecosystem that they control, and now it allows them to provision a much better fan experience on top of it. Everybody always laughs because the price of parking in New York City is probably higher than the price of a ticket in Montreal. Here's an example of something that we launched at CES with Honda. It's called Honda's Dream Drive. So you can sit down in and the nice thing about what Honda did, they used our technology and they built a voice-based app that is backwards compatible to everything back to model year, I think 2015. So you could sit down in your Honda and say, Honda, I'm going to the Raptors game, if you're so lucky. Help me find parking. And through voice command, it'll give you your options, allow you to transact, and then it'll automatically send you a parking pass directly to the wallet of your phone. So you have a completely friction-free, voice-based user experience. This is where it's all going. We work with Siri, we work with Android Auto, and one of our biggest partners is Amazon Alexa. So actually, Amazon invested in our company in our last equity round, and Amazon very famously is launching a massive program aimed at Alexa Auto, and parking is one of the core functionalities that you'll be able to do with Alexa. So very similar to what Honda is doing on their own. Any car that will be equipped either with aftermarket or comes native with Alexa, you'll be able to find, book, and pay for parking through your Amazon account, and it'll automatically get billed to your payment mechanism. We have 2 journeys that we offer. One is you can prepay and save. The other one is just driving up. We think that that's between 70 and 80% of the use cases, is you'll see a Apple Pay equipped lot, and it's going to be friction free. You just drive up, there's no pulling tickets, there's no starting a session. The system knows when you came, the system knows when you leave, it will bill you. It's what we call confirmational commerce. We have all of the data to provision this. We have geofence data, and we know all you basically have to say is yes, start a parking session. And this works valet, this works in a closed gated facility, and this works equally well in an open surface lot. So there's no more pulling a ticket, putting it on your windshield. All of that is yesterday's news. And all of this, as I said, works today. I think the key thing for us, we came to this conclusion relatively quickly, is that there's no room for a conversion funnel in a car. It's really about confirmational commerce, leveraging contextual data. We know where you are, where you're going, how long you're going to be there. We should be able to provision like 90% of the data inputs for you to start a session. And then if we know your UID and a payment mechanism, we're done. You don't have to do anything. There's no more searching a map and figuring out where to go. And that's really where the future is. So what does all this mean to payments? And why am I actually standing here telling you all about our business? Well, the reality is, and we're already seeing this in markets like New York and Chicago, where the penetration rate is highest because we've been there the longest, is cash is moving out of the system. Cash moving out of the system is huge for parking. The loss rate attached to cash transactions is 18% for parking operators. So one of almost every $5 that is kind of going through the till is going into someone's pocket. So their ability to move to a cashless transaction is massive. It's also displacing terrestrial card-present systems, whether that's a ticketing machine or a machine that you're going to hit on the exit. All of that, because the transaction is now happening on your phone or through a beacon based on a wallet that is native in your car, all of those transactions are moving upstream into the cloud. And it's a major disruption for equipment manufacturers because operators and landowners realize that the future of parking has very little to do with, drilling up cement and putting in huge systems. They know who's there. They know whether they need to be there. It also reduces the cost of enforcement. So all of these interfaces that were native to our industry are going the way of the fax machine and the payphone. It's interesting. One of the largest operators in New York, when he kind of pushed out of the payphone business because that went the way of the dodo bird, then he found refuge in the parking industry. So I wonder what's next. Where he's going to go next. What does all of this mean? On a global basis, you've got a parking industry that's $100 billion and growing. And you apply any penetration rate to digital parking, and that's the volume of transactions that are moving out of current payment rails and into this new methodology. And I would suggest strongly, and those are some of the discussions we're having with the large people in the payment industry, is what role will you play in capturing part of that stream? That there's a big opportunity to capture that. So whether it's 20% or 40%, or as we've seen in other industries, 60%, that's a lot of transactions that are no longer going to be either 20% cash or the rest, because they're all mostly today card-present transactions. All of that is moving. And the rate of adoption is accelerating. I think if I was standing here 3 years from now, we'd be talking about what happened and not what's in the midst of happening. That's it. I did it in 28 minutes and whatever seconds. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
I just had a question. So in terms of like cities that already have their parking, like we already have green tea parking here
Yep.
in Toronto and stuff like that. Do you approach them to say, hey, city, we'll take that over, and give them and pay them a royalty so they don't have to be in that business?
So the parking industry today, the digital parking industry today, the early adopters were the cities. And there are three major providers of what I would call city-based curbside parking solutions. Park Mobile, which is owned by BMW, oddly enough. Pay by Phone, Park Mobile is owned by BMW. Pay by Phone, which is owned by Volkswagen. And the last independent on the city side, which is a company called Passport, which I believe runs Green Pea here in Toronto. I know they run Montreal. And those guys basically provide the service to the city for pennies per transaction. Sometimes it's a user fee. We're not in that business at all. What we've discovered, both from our fleet customers and our large navigation customers and the OEMs, is they're like, it's difficult for us to consider an on-street and an off-street solution. Can't you guys stitch that together into a single solution? That's coming. That we're going to be piloting that in 5 cities, Detroit being one of them, this summer. So there is an integrated solution. We have as a company, we have no aspirations of getting into the curbside business. We just partner with guys who do. We take their APIs, and the most important thing is we provide guys like Google Maps and Ford with an integrated solution that says, you want to park on street, here it is. You want to park off street, here it is. Yes?
A little bit about data protection and how do you protect the data? How do you protect the data? Because you're actually getting customer data, where they are, where they're located. How do you protect that data?
So we're very thoughtful about that, and we've gone through we've gone through numerous privacy audits. One thing that we do, and it was part of our pivot, it was a key, the whole data thing for us was a key learning experience like 2.5 years ago when we decided that our future was being an embedded service, an enterprise company. It was really important that we were able to shield one company's data from another's. So that is built into our architecture. I would tell you it wasn't there 3 years ago. And it's one of the things that really has helped distinguish us. Because when people show up and say, well, I'm a consumer app, but I could do an enterprise version, it's not the same thing. Data really is a primary consideration of ours. In many cases, we don't actually handle the transaction. For Ticketmaster is the vendor of record. For Avis, the charges are actually integrated directly into the consumer's complete billing, and it gets billed out as one charge when they return the vehicle. So, we do a lot of pass-through. We do a lot of tokenization. If there are any really smart folks on the payment processing side, I'm sure there are in this room. We're actively shopping for a new solution that's, I think, better than what we have.
Can this data be hacked? Because if somebody can find out the location of the car, can it be hacked?
I'm swimming in very, very deep water. What I could tell you is that, we work with best of breed from a technology point of view. So we support Apple, Amazon, Ticketmaster, all the OEMs. They've asked these questions, and we're able to support their audits. So I'm just going to presume that we're safe. How is that's out of my pay grade. Yes.
Do you see parking going into the Airbnb model that private citizens can sign up for renting a spot?
That's a really good question. The question was parking becoming kind of peer-to-peer. We do a little bit of that, and there are companies who tried that. The economics are really crappy. It takes the same amount of energy to onboard a parking garage with 4,000 spaces, or at Pearson, I think they've got 25,000 spaces, as it does some guy who's got a laneway near Wrigley Field. And we know because Wrigley Field is one of those crazy places where there isn't a lot of parking, and we do have a lot of individuals who rent their yards, and because it's a good place for them to make money. A bunch of guys have tried it. It's just the model just does not scale because it's super, super labor intensive, and it can get really complicated. Yes.
Do you get involved in all working with the parking providers on how they design their actual lots and their spaces?
That's a great question. The question was, do we get involved in design? More and more. And it's not only the parking operators, but it's actually now the REITs, or the building owner, the asset owners themselves. Like, for example, they're building the new hockey arena in Seattle, and we work with Oakview, which is the company that's building the arena. They brought us in at the beginning and said, okay, we want a comprehensive parking solution. The reality, event is a business unto itself. Like, for example, we work with the Dallas Cowboys. They convert like empty fields on Sundays and some Thursday nights into parking garages. And so how do you handle ingress? How do you handle egress? So we do a lot of that type of work. We also sometimes work with cities, because when a stadium with 35 or 40,000 people empties into the middle of a city, at the that affects how long it can take you to get out of a garage. So people's perception of satisfaction, there are many layers, but ingress and egress is a big consideration. So yes, we do. And the earlier we can get involved with somebody, the better, because then we can share with them best practices, amongst our portfolio, both on the demand and the supply side. I think I'm out of time. I think we'll take that last one.
Sure. So you mentioned cash was going away, which I don't disagree with. There are a lot of policymakers on both sides of the border that are introducing laws that would make it illegal not to accept cash. Their argument being that you're hurting the poor, that you don't have access to phones, et cetera, the digital payment methods. How do you think about that argument and those policies?
Look, there's a trade-off. I think that the trade-off versus fraud, I think if you're in an industry where, $1 out of $5 is being stolen, I think you can make a compelling argument that there's a need to move as many people as you can to a non-cash system. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate your time.